wabanoosh, a wabanoosh, a wabanoosh, a wabanoosh, a wabanoosh, a wabanoosh, a wabanoosh. At sister school, Zagima lost her Indian name, her language, her hair, her culture, her mother, her family, her childhood. At sister school, Zagima learned hunger, fear, shame, regret, anger, resentment, and the art of beating. At sister school, Zagima learned how to survive in the white man's world. She passed these things on to me. "We may be Indian," she said, "but by God we ain't dirty." And so, like her, I learned to scrub floors on my prayer bones, proud of the outcome, but angry as hell at the pain. Like most Shinabikwe, Zagima could tell good stories. I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but that's all her stories about sister school began. I recall summer afternoons lying on her bed in the dark, cool bedroom where she would recreate stories from her childhood for me. She told of the death of Sister Catherine, the Mother Superior of the convent, who beat her for stealing an apple. Sister fell down the steps to the root cellar where the food was stored and hit her head. Oh, how us kids did a silent cheer, she recalled, still giggling at the memory of Sister getting her comeuppance. I know now, however, that most of the stories were sanitized and wishful memories, in which her father was not a violent alcoholic, who beat his young bride and repeatedly left them after vain attempts to provide for his family. Her mother was not a desperate young woman who simply gave up on her children. In her stories, her father was a hero who never stopped trying to win his children back. My mother left out the real jagged pain of abandonment, worthlessness, and the undiagnosed mental illness. I learned these things on my own when I was strong enough to hear them. Her nameless rage at those who robbed her of everything permeated our lives. The legacy of sister school was handed down to us. Unlike an innocent family legend, however, its force entered our veins. She told us about the time her mother brought her a 5-pound box of chocolates. It was the only time she ever visited Zagima at the sister school. Back in the dormitory, she devoured the candy, stuffing it in her mouth until she threw up. "I never did like chocolates after that, and I never liked my mother," she told me. Mother's love was a sweetness she would never taste. She died with the flavor of bile still in her mouth. The risk of forgiveness was too much, and so her anger could continue its journey until now. My work here begins with forgiveness. Forgiveness for my mother and the well-intentioned actions of others. Not long ago, I learned that, like her mother, she too had abandoned a child, her firstborn, a boy named Bobby. We never met. He died years ago. I see now that his spirit permeated our lives in the form of my mother's unexpressed guilt and sorrow. I have one of those indistinct childhood memories in which I think I met Bobby briefly in Chicago. Many Ojibwa, including our extended family, took advantage of the 50s and 60s federal Indian relocation program, leaving reservations and moving to cities. I heard that my auntie and uncle found Bobby on Chicago's north side, where so many Indians had settled. He was virtually homeless. They tried to arrange a reunion with my mother. According to this third-hand story, however, my mother didn't take to him. My memory of Bobby is as follows. When I was around 7 years old, my mother and I took the train to Chicago to visit my Auntie Lucille. As always, I was enthralled with the grandeur of the great Union Terminal, mostly ignoring the furtive adult conversation. At some point, I found myself sitting in the back seat of my auntie's borrowed car with a young man. I see his upturned face as he gazes out of the car window, bathed in that unique skyscraper-reflected light that defined my childhood memories of the great city. He was clearly nervous, anxiously talking to no one in particular about his future life plans. He was taking welding classes. One day he hoped to be a pilot. "I want to fly," he said. Looking at that delicate Ojibwa face, one could sense his insecurity, apparent even to a 7-year-old. I remember feeling embarrassed for him. Having tried to win my mother's attention myself, I knew the humiliation of those efforts all too well. My gaze turned to the tall buildings once again as I wondered at their canyons of windows and concrete. The young man was gone. and I was alone in the back seat. My auntie said, "They say his welds don't hold." I never saw the young man again. And, as was so often the case, people floated in and out of our family without explanation. How deeply my mother must have believed those sister school messages. I know now that her anger and rage were as much directed at herself as towards the school. She would go silent when I asked about Bobby, retreating into a protective circle of anger. Ojibwa people believe that we may not be recognized in the spirit world if we don't know our traditional Indian names. It has always pained me that my mother was made to forget her name, and I had intended to have another naming ceremony for her. Unfortunately, time and circumstances didn't allow for this to happen. A leader of my lodge, however, gave us a name that is used for babies and folks like my mom. The name Zagima means child of love. And so Child of Love walked on to the spirit world on September 19th, 2011. We feasted her on the first and fourth day, which is our way. I'm confident that she was well received in that world. Not long after she passed, I found some of her beadwork, only bits and pieces now. They carry her signature design, and like all good loom work, they lie flat and strong when placed on a table. I first saw her work by accident when I was less than 5 years old, stumbling over it as I rummaged through her dresser drawers. Oh, what mysteries those drawers held for a little girl. The smell of French perfume in its tiny bottle, and the slightly acrid smell that was her, spoke of secrets yet to be revealed. Her loom work laid in the bottommost drawer, hidden like beautiful, tightly coiled snakes. There were yards of the stuff, and I felt as though I'd discovered a marvelous treasure. Intricate yet strong, the links were a tactile joy to hold. I marveled at how the individual beads could come together to create such beauty. And selfish child that I was, I wanted to make my own creations. There were only a few remaining loose beads, so, incredibly, she let me cut her loom work apart. It was slow going using my little scissors, but I managed to extract most of the beads, enough to fill a half-gallon sized Tupperware container. Finding the bits of remaining loom work caused me to wonder again why she let me cut it all up. I asked her shortly before she passed last year, and she just smiled her faraway smile and answered with the question, "Oh, why do we do things?" I recall that she had intended to make the beadwork into belts for all the men in our family. I imagined her pride as an Ojibwa woman, a Shinabikwe, as she spent those many hours over the loom creating something her men could wear with pride. She learned to bead at the sister school, where the Franciscan nuns sold her work to wealthy white patrons of the order, thus forever tainting her handiwork with shame. I thought of these things as I laid the beadwork over my wrist and admired once again its strength and intricate design, a bit frayed on the ends, but still durable after all these years. I noted that I had inadvertently placed the beads over an old jailhouse tattoo made years ago during my month-long stint in reform school, put on with thread-covered sewing needles and dipped in the ink of a broken Bic pen. The tattoo spelled out squaw in ragged letters. Fueled by youthful bluster, it was my defiant declaration of ethnic pride in the face of a racist world. My swagger wasn't very tough even back then, and the tattoo is now barely legible. Seemingly out of nowhere, the vision of having the beadwork design tattooed over the squaw tattoo came to me. I'm not sure if Mom would have approved of me getting a tattoo at this stage in my life, but for some reason, I'm now able to put her picture up in my home. Her framed image that we displayed at her funeral lay face down in my house for several months because I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Now, I pass it every day and I feel her presence, Wewene, in a good way. Stripped of all her shame, anger, and resentment, her image brings me peace. Miigwech.